Hey everyone, when they're here, and today we have a little bit of commentary talking about Sky, specifically on Lotus, and a little bit of defensive tips. This was requested by Striven in the last map control video I put out. So we're just going to jump into this today and go over some Sky stuff. So before we get into details about Sky specifically on this map, it's important we refresh a few key points on the utility, the nuance of her utility, and then how that relates to overall gameplay, along with initiator tips in general on defense or on attack. And this is like the base idea for any defensive initiator setup. We can reference a video I put out earlier where it was just the idea of being proactive. This is something that seems very straightforward, but it's an issue I see drastically common with any initiator I've run into, whether it's in ladder play or whether it's with tier 3 teams trying to make their move and trying to improve and get up the ladder in pro play. Players either don't communicate when they use utility, which causes players that are trying to play around it to be caught out or not be aware for what their teammate is trying to do, or initiators simply aren't using their utility enough. And this is common in like the lower end of ladder play, but this leads to repeating issues within the given game state, whether it's missing timings, whether it's not optimizing our utility to make our site take easier or our site defensive hold more efficient and easier, how we're choosing to obtain information throughout the match. The list goes on. And it's important to understand this ideal if you want to play initiator at any level. While it's on the duelist to create space, it's equally on the initiator and the controller to make that space creation comfortable for them. All three pieces matter significantly on a site take. It's not anyone's individual job. The next point we'll talk about is the 30-second rule. And this is like a relative rule between any info initiator in general. When you're working with any of these info initiators, whether it's Skye, Sova, Fade being the three main ones we have right now, you want to split your utility of gaining info out every 30 seconds. So in the case of this video, you lead with the Sky Flash early for info, and then later you dog if you need any re-clears necessary, like if 20-30 seconds go by, and then you have this third flash ready to go for the final site hit or the site defense you need to have, whether it's for you for self-sufficiency, whether you're anchoring down on site and you need to just make a play and zone someone out. But it allows you to chain all of these pieces of utility at once, right? And the logic applies for the same other two initiators too. If you're playing Sova, you dart first, you drone second, then you have dart for the final hit. For Fade, you have her eye, then a prowler, then you have eye and prowler for the final hit. It's an important base level concept that helps prevent you from burning all of your utility in your info tools at once on defense, leaving an opening for you to be punished. There's obviously lines where this changes and gets more complex, but it's a good base level to think of that you can adapt to and shift your utility around based on the needs of the game state. For example, we'll talk about in this video later is how you can info flash early, get yourself in this position, and then set up a duelist for a rubble peek by using your second flash, because your dog here isn't necessary, it's too slow. If you're going to flash for this position and teams are going to scale rubble, there's nothing the dog does for you here. So that's where your second flash comes in to peek rubble for the duelist player, and that's how things can sort of be an example of how they can change. So finally, before we get into some general tips, we'll talk about the nuance of Skye. And so initially in that initiator video I put out, I felt Skye was one of the easier initiators to learn just due to the power within her kit. But there is a tad bit of nuance, even with her power at the moment, that can lead her to being more complex than other agents. The first being, when are you using her flash for information, and when are you using it for zoning or self-sufficiency? The second being, how are you adapting this style of play around what the enemy team is providing you in terms of their comp and style of play? So what do I mean by that? So like with Fade, you can do these Fade eye lineups, and then you have Prowler that's pretty straightforward, right? Like if we just act like this is Prowler because I'm lazy. They're two pieces of utility that are straightforward. But the power of SKYE's flash is it's also not only an info flash, but it's a true flash that can't be broken. So there will be times where you're playing against like a breach on this map or a killjoy, where maybe you can't play this aggressively because they just stun you out and they pin you here. So you need to change your routing of play to maybe you're playing backside passive tree to where you can get out safely. Maybe you're choosing to play stairwells instead and just flashing for your team here to take a deep fight, to then be able to dog and fully re-clear all of B main if you need to. That's kind of the idea you want to be thinking about. You can't always just focus on the robotics of the play and go, okay, this is always going to be an info flash. This is always going to be a self flash or whatever you choose to do. So let's get into some baseline strategy, right? So most SKYEs, for the most part, are usually starting at this barrier on A side. And it's always starting with a heavy flash that will stall out this team attacking. It usually pops about here. And it'll make the team second guess their way on how they want to scale outwards. This is usually done with you having to communicate in ladder play, like, hey, I'm going to flash for you to get heavy rubble control. The duelist should scale up roughly to rubble side here. And then based on whatever info this flash provides is how the duelist should choose to act. If this flash does not tag anybody, you can look for your team to fast scale out A, and now you guys can work a containment and keep the enemy team focused in B main and C main. And then from here, you can make the rest of your decision on, hey, do we need to continue to pinch through B or C main, or have they not hit out yet? These are questions you can kind of ask on your approach. Are they up C? Are they up C? Looking at your map, yeah, they're on C. Okay, we can work this fast rotate. They're not up C. They're not up C. Then you can work this containment with your teammate. That way you have room to fall off. Now, if the team is heavy contesting out A, you could flash once to zone. And then once you get into this position and your duelist is here, you can send a second flash rubble side to enable your duelist to peek, and then you can also peek to help them further. Because this player will then peek off this flash, they can contest, that opens you up to contest here, and then you can efficiently work this pinch. And then as I sort of mentioned earlier, if the enemy team has a solid A-hit offensive utility to back you off, such as a breach stun, or, you know, an Astra Star, if they choose to pull this in mix of getting like fast rubble scaling, you can play more passive off this. So like you can start here if you need to, and then you can play passive and fall back sight. And then if you hear door, you can then dog re-clear for full door control and mix of your teammates communicating. Or you can choose to even give up sight completely if you need to, like if they have a killjoy ult they're about to use, and then just prepare yourself for heavy retake. So the next part is on any type of rotation or re-clear. So usually from this position, if you need to go and clear B, that's where your dog comes in handy. You just work your dog info. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. Like if you get backed off, they smoke here. You should, in theory, be able to safely dog, re-clear, get that information for your team. That's pretty universal on most maps. Even if you're playing on like Split, for example, you start on A. You can always flash first for info, and then choose to follow up with a dog if you get smoked off, just to gain more information for your team. And that's kind of where the exceptions sort of exist on not chaining your utility every 30 seconds, right? That's just the matter of in the game moment where you need to kind of have that flexibility. Usually what costs teams on this map or players on this map defensively is either the route to fighting a main, so this whole positioning a main here. Teams are too afraid to use utility and contest this space and force the attacker's hand to burn their utility to fight for all of this neutral space control. Like, this is essentially open map, right? Which is why this side is usually like a 3-1-1. It's like 3 on A, you'll have one person link mainly, one person waterfall side, and then you have your sentinel link or C. it's usually heavy A here for a reason, right? And teams will be too afraid to use utility and contest this and take fights, which lets the attack side control the pacing. And if they control the pacing, they control all this space. That's what allows Broken Door here to get busted. Teams can fast rotate, and it's a lot easier for the attackers to control the pacing of this map, which is why it feels very T-sided at times. On defense, you always want to make sure, and this is like a fundamental rule, that the attack side has to work for every amount of space that they're given. Not in the sense of, okay, hey guys, barrier dropped, I'm just going to run it down into main with no util, but just making sure the attackers have to respect your presence to earn this space. If I ask you on any map, if we pull up any map and I tell you, hey, you have to sit in this spot back site and let them work all of this space for free, is it easier to play here? Or is it easier to have the flexibility to start here, right off the barrier, and have the freedom to move as the attackers work their way up? And I can tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a lot more fun having the flexibility to do whatever you can do than be pinned right here and forced to take all the utility head on. This concept here is unironically the reason why Fracture is so hard for players to play, because the map flips the idea of neutral on its head and it forces you to work your way out. Just in like other aspects of this map, like if you're on heavy eco or if you're playing flex, you can choose to play water. You have a SKYE pop that works if you need to get a opera in position. You could play quickly to get an opera in position. There's 2 different flashes. There used to be a really popular KO flash. That was just a pop flash right here. And then it's just the other matter is just playing flex. You don't ever want to be caught playing B on B. It's just really tough. You're pinned. There's no way out for you, which is why usually there's Sentinel utility, and then there's a flex player that's just playing in the in-between space. So the main idea is you want to make the attackers work for it. If I pull up Tracker or Valoplant, so sort of what we talked about, right? Is if you pull up, can't find Lotus. You want to make the attacking team work for all of this space. So usually ways that you can do that, like if you have a Raze and a SKYE, is you have the straightforward play. You have the bird from SKYE, right? That comes out. You have Raze's grenade or paint shells that zones the space, which Raze then gets positioned rubble. And then from here, you now have a secondary condition you can play around, where you can now flash frontside rubble for Raze to take this peak, for you to then take the next peak. Often you'll see like an Omen Paranoia that comes off the bat here too, to just heavy stall this push. This is pretty popular in mix of the initial flash with the Raze grenade. Other conditions you can play for is it's pretty well known on this map that teams love to heavy util this right off the bat. So sometimes what I'll do is I will wait until round 3 and then I will work with my Raze and my Omen, because by round 3 usually a team gets an idea, okay, hey, they're not using heavy util, and then you can usually catch them off guard by doing the flash, the nade with the paranoia combo. If this is your comp, like you can put a, you know, whatever else utility you need here depending on what you have. But usually you can hard punish teams in ladder play that way and sort of like partially condition them that you don't use util a certain way. There used to be an Omen one way that existed here too. I believe it still existed, but I don't think there's much value for this anymore, as it is just using your utility. But the idea is you're using 2 pieces of utility to force the attacking team, should they have a SKYE, to also have to use utility. And the more utility you can get the opponent to burn in these neutral spaces, the harder it is for them to have a successful site execute. And it's either going to force them in ladder play to be stupid and just try to ego fight all of this, or the other condition you're met with is these players will leave because they need to find a way to reset their SKYE utility to give them a chance to be successful. And if they leave, you then have gained all of this space with your utility. You then, in turn, gain information that they're not A, and they can only ever be B or C. And that arms your rotating players to also be ready for any fight that they need to take. If we take this point to Fracture, like I brought up, for example, on LOTUS, like how fun would it be if I forced you as a player to only play backside and let the attacking team have full control of this space, or have the freedom to move, right? Like, or is it more fun that you can flash, scale forward based on the condition, decide to rotate? Where instead of you being limited to this little box, you're now given this whole space, right? This is yours. If we apply that to Fracture, to my point of sort of what I made in that map control video, why it's frustrating, players play either tower or main, and then the other players are playing site, rope, or they just play all 1v1s like this, right? Like none of these spots are fun because you just have to give up all this neutral with one person when you know at minimum there's probably going to be 3 people here. So you solo peeking this with an op isn't going to be that fun. It's not going to be a good time, right? Whereas if you work with a teammate, let's say a Brim can smoke deep and you get underneath, you now have effectively made all of this positioning yours. That leaves 3 spots left, depending on what you guys see underneath. So if you and Brim then come underneath because you worked out that, hey, they're not on arcade side, and you hear no presence at all B, you've now made this whole space yours. And that leaves only 2 spots left for them. And it just makes your life so much easier, right? Same idea as if we go on A this time. So let's say we go on A. Brim smokes deep here, which you'll see a lot in high MMR games. Controllers are smoking deep A main. They want you to work for it. And you still have these 4-head players that will just peek out of this with no util. 2 of you then double up. You now contest this space. If they're not here, this is now yours with orb. You can make the guess if they're not here. It's doubtful for the most part that they're going like 4 dish. And if you have a dish player, they're probably already peeking this and clearing that information out as well. Or your B players have the audio read of, hey, they're using util outside B main. You now can make this space yours. And to the same idea, you've now cut off this whole part of the map that leaves 2 positions for them to deal with. Then, once the team scales on site, let's say they do get site, your chamber dies. Now you flip the same idea of why defense sucks on the attackers. Now they have to try and play defense pinned on site. This is not fun. This is not a fun position for them. So it's just the idea of using utility to make your life easy. Other like minor things, like if we talk about split, make sure if you're playing SKYE that you're always paired up with your space creation duelist. Like you two should be buddy pocketed for a majority of the game state. Okay. You're always looking to set up Jet and enable Jet to be successful. If Jet wants to go play B, you're following Jet B. There's some exceptions where this changes, but usually Jet is somewhat near you to play off of you to any degree. If not, you're not playing to your best ability and you're playing for yourself too much. There's a lot higher chance of success of you enabling a Jet or a Raze or a Neon or any duelist for that matter than there is you supporting, a Sage. Like there's conditions where like you supporting a Sage is okay. But usually you want the Jet here so that she can play off of whatever flash utility that you use to get her set up in an op angle for you to then leave and be more flexible because of it, right? So in regards to like other maps, it's important to follow the same baseline ideals on like chaining your utility and being flexible to the condition in front of you. And one of the things that can kind of help you do this is just establishing a 2 to 3 step plan in your head. Okay, if defenders choose to do this, I will follow up with X. If defenders do this, I follow up with Y. If we go back to our Lotus example, right? If we're throwing flash here, if this flash does not tag, then either we are rotating based on information or we are taking this space. If this flash tags, then I'm going to scale up and file a secondary flash for my teammate. If this flash tags and they have breach or killjoy utility, I'm falling off to play passive post plant on site so that way I can keep my life alive and not die to these ults, right? This type of mentality is something a lot of ranked players don't do, and it'll help you become more flexible in the moment based on the needs of the match. It'll be less like choice anxiety almost, where you have all these options, you don't know what to do. It allows you to simplify those options and be more assertive with your actions. So I hope this video is what you're looking for, especially for you, Striven. I hope this helps give you a little bit more insight. Along with anyone else looking for general SKYE or initiator tips, I definitely recommend watching the early initiator video I put out regarding general initiator play. If you're new, make sure to hit a like and subscribe if this video helped you, because it tremendously helps me on the back end as I look to grow this channel and hopefully elevate the player base of Valorant. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you next time when they're out.